You're good to go, Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Hello, everybody. I'd like to call to order the Wednesday, October 18th special City Council workshop. Carrie, do I need to do roll call?
Just a quick roll call would be great. Thank you.
I will certainly do that. Council President Conley,
Here.
Councilor Ross,
Present.
Councilor Letts, Councilor Blum.
Here.
All right. I'm Mayor Prieden. I am here. And we have a fun meeting today, Destination Management Initiative presentation. And whoever needs to go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor, and good afternoon, Council. I'm going to start us off with just a little bit of an introduction and background as it relates to how we got to this project. And then at the end, I can talk a little bit about some of the next steps and where we'll be going from here. I see a few folks from the public, which is great. This information will be shared on the website and available for others to be able to view it after this as well. And I see Councilor Letts just joined. So obviously we all know that Sisters has been a destination for a long time, and the nonprofit sector, private sector, and public sector have all contributed in a lot of ways to make it such a shining example and a place for people to want to visit. But we also know that in the last few years in particular, we've had an onslaught of challenges as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic and wildfires and other things that we need to coordinate and manage through. The 2018 Sisters Country Vision organized into 4 focus areas: resiliency, connectedness, livability, and prosperity. And one of the things that we've yet to do as it relates to tourism and Sisters as a destination is plan for the rest of this decade and beyond how we're going to balance and manage all of those things accordingly. So this effort, bringing on Kristen Dahl from Cross Current Collective and Eco Northwest, they have been brought on to set the foundation, provide some background information, probably spur a lot more questions necessarily than answers, and help us figure out where we're going to go from here and what that's going to look like. Kristen, I'll let her do a little brief introduction, but she has over a decade of experience working with Travel Oregon and working with communities similar to Sisters across the state, and really working through a collaborative lens as it relates to bringing partnerships in those communities together to do visioning and figure out how to be better destinations from a sustainability and stewardship perspective as well. So phase 1, as I mentioned, was information gathering. Kristen conducted a destination scan, and Dan is her associate as well, working on that. And then Egan and Eco Northwest did a visitor opportunity survey over the summer to gather some information around what we're hearing and seeing from current visitors. This was, again, sort of a behind the scenes effort to just lay some foundational work. And I do want to introduce the project management team who worked with the city and with Cross Current to shape this process. So Judy Trago and Nick Beasley from the Sisters Chamber participated, Ian Reed from the Forest Service, Cappy Lewis, former SCED, Sisters Country Economic Development Area Director, participated. Nancy Conley, Council President, Carrie Prosser, City Recorder and Assistant to the City Manager, myself, as well as Julia Thiessen from Central Oregon Visitors Association. And I don't think I'm leaving anybody out. So to stay on schedule, we've got about an hour and a half slated, and we will break up after some segments of the presentation to take some Q&A and have a little bit of discussion. But with all that said, I want to pass it over to Kristen to get going. Thanks.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Corey. Thanks for the great introduction. Yeah, it's wonderful to see you all here. Thank you for taking the additional time to hear more about this project. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen sharing, and I have a deck to share with you for essentially the duration of the presentation, and then I'll pass the baton over to Egan, and he'll be doing the same to share the visitor opportunity study. So once I get rolling here, what I wanted to share, those of you who aren't working in Zoom day in and day out, just remember there's a little view options black bar at the top of your screen. And if you drop that caret down, you can do the side-by-side view and kind of change the width or the size of the presentation. Now, I'm sure you guys are all well dialed with that. So we'll just go ahead and move on. So thank you so much for the introduction. Excited to share with you some of the work that we've done in this phase 1 of this whole initiative. What we'll be covering today as an overview is just kind of, first I'm going to share a bit of a process overview, so what we set out to accomplish. I'll share a little bit about what a destination strategy is and some of those key terms that we use in those. And then I'll share some key takeaways right at the front. So kind of what are the big picture takeaways from this work, this first phase, so that you kind of know the end of the story before we dive into some details. Then I'm going to move on and share some highlights from our destination scan. That's one of the work products that we did under this first phase of work. And I'll take a little bit of a deep dive into the stakeholder and focus group results so that you can hear some of what the community reflected back to us. And then we're going to stop and take some Q&A. And so that's about 35-ish minutes from now. So what I'd like to do is to welcome you to write down any questions that come up throughout that, and we can address that during the Q&A. And if you could hold your questions rather than putting them in the chat, that would be really great. And then I'll be passing the baton over to Egan from Eco Northwest, and he'll be sharing the visitor opportunity study results, some of the highlights, not the whole thing. And then we'll have, again, some time for Q&A. And then we'll close with just an overview of what phase 2 could look like and who might be involved should you should you decide to pursue a phase 2 of this initiative. And then just closing comments from Corey. So that's where we're headed. And actually, before I do that, are there any quick questions before I dive in? And I would just say, go ahead and unmic yourself. But you all look pretty content and mic'd and some cameras off, and that's totally fine because I'll mostly be looking at the screen. So feel free to speak up if you do have something you need to say in the interim so I can hear you. So Corey did introduce me. I've been doing sort of destination development type work for most of my career. I have been working in rural communities in Oregon since 2014, actually starting with rural development initiatives. I remember the Sisters Country Vision as it got started many years ago. But most of my professional background is in the tourism industry. And I spent the last 13 years prior to a year ago working for Travel Oregon, where I led the creation of the Destination Development Department and served as the VP for the last 5 years before deciding to go out on my own so that I could do this work and with more intentionality around focused planning and also being able to work in a range of communities, not just in Oregon. So the Destination Management Initiative, really, Corey covered this, but really together what we did was we sort of at the outset outlined some medium-term outcomes for this area and what you would really want to achieve as kind of an overall process. And that was a clear vision for the future success, a clear understanding of local values that would be central to the strategy, a roadmap to implement priority projects that move the community sort of powerfully towards some kind of vision of success, an agreed upon organizational structure to support the implementation of a destination strategy, and then some kind of a funding plan in place that would support it. But instead of kind of going directly towards those objectives, we decided to take this initial phase for really sort of scoping, data collection, and research. And that included assembling this phase 1 project leadership team, which you just met, conducting a destination scan to really better understand local context. That included research, focus groups, and interviews. And then separately, we did a visitor opportunity study, which was reaching out to the visitor to really understand who they are and why they're coming to Sisters Country, and then of course a whole bunch of data around that. And then we also identified organizations that could serve on a destination leadership team moving forward, and we outlined a process for this next phase, phase 2, that would really be designed to sort of achieve those medium-term outcomes outlined in the last slide. So the project leadership team, as Corey introduced, all of these folks, I don't need to go through them again. Thank you to all of you who were able to join today. And as I think Corey mentioned, Cappy Lewis is not on that project management team with the change in job. And then we also invited Nick Beasley, who was invited but was not able to attend. So quick step back, a destination strategy. What is it? So I think it's maybe fairly obvious, but just to sort of recap it or summarize it, it's really creating a roadmap for a sustainable tourism destination. And the reason they exist is because to manage a visitor economy is a very complex activity that requires a lot of different players to be at the table and sort of work in concert with one another. So a destination strategy is really about creating something that everyone can work from and everyone can be inspired by, and to really kind of create efficiencies in these areas of management, development, marketing, and stewardship activities. So when we use the term destination, we don't mean a 5-star resort. We mean a destination is a place that people want to go. And this is an important concept just to sort of lay the groundwork, because we're not talking about a city unit or a county unit or even a state unit. Most of the time, destinations from the visitor angle are really kind of defined by the geography where they sit. So you might have the Rio Grande or the Appalachian Trail. And so they're described by where they are. And Sisters Country is very much that type of a place where you're not really talking about one city unit. You're not necessarily talking about a county, but you're talking about sort of this place that people are drawn to because of the compilation of activities. So when we look at a destination strategy, we're really talking about sort of 4 different things. And I'll do a quick definition. Destination management is really that act of coordinating activities across multiple agencies and organizations to manage visitor impacts and improve livability. Destination development is another term that you'll hear. It's really the act of improving the experience within the destination, both for visitors and residents. And then you've got destination marketing, which is probably what we're mostly familiar with, because this is kind of the most traditional activity when you think of what communities do to attract visitation. And that's the act of raising awareness and attracting visitors through communications, branding, and promotion. And then another component that many destinations are considering now is this angle of destination stewardship. So it's the act of protecting ecosystems, landscapes, and cultures that define a place. Now, they're not all sort of parallel, but when you sort of put them all together, this is what it looks like. You've got destination management as kind of that overarching term, which is really sort of the coordination and collaboration of entities to steward the destination. And then within that management system, you've got, areas of focus. So destination development, which includes, really that experience development, visitor management. You've got destination marketing, which encompasses a number of things depending on the size of your destination and your budget. And then destination stewardship. So how are we really giving back, protecting nature, culture, and investing in innovation? So these are kind of the main components of a destination strategy. And what I want to point out again is just to underscore the complexity of tourism. It's not a throughput industry. It's not as easy as saying we take that tree and then we turn it into a product. It has many inputs and many players that contribute to the end experience for a visitor and for the community. And so when we walk into a community, if you consider each one of these arrows to be an agency, an organization, a business, or an individual that contributes to that ecosystem, what we usually find is that everyone's working with their head down and they're working really, really hard, right? They're working a lot of hours and they don't necessarily have the time to connect with one another and to really figure out how somebody else in the ecosystem can help uplift what they're doing. So the point of creating a destination strategy is to really work on that. And I know you're familiar with visioning, I get that, but this is really about creating a very specific vision around tourism and outdoor recreation that the community can angle towards, so that individual agency, organizations, and businesses can take actions that ladder up to something that's bigger and more impactful and also potentially harder than they can do on their own. So that's kind of why we do these things. So I want to share with you some of the key takeaways from the work, and then I'll share with you guys a little bit about the work. So these are kind of, these are themes, I guess, or concepts that surface to the top. So here's a few of the key findings. So Sisters Country is replete with assets. you guys know this, you have a lot of awesome ingredients. You're surrounded by world-class outdoors. You have incredible businesses, you have incredible entrepreneurs within the community and characters and arts and everything else, okay? So you know that, and that's why people are stopping and coming already. But some of the experiences aren't really fully baked, and there's a lot of gaps in the experience, whether it's seasonally, geographically, and also by type. There's some very specific gaps that people have surfaced and that seem to be present. So while things are, you have a lot there, they're not necessarily being thought about or well connected in new ways. People are really concerned about how to protect the natural areas and cultural assets, as well as your local values. So how, as the community of sisters changes and potentially invites more visitation, how can we protect these things and also our values at the core of those? And then people are concerned about the approach of more is better. And they're really interested in this specific sector of seeing more attention given to improving the visitor experience and developing a destination for shoulder and off-season visitation. That there's generally a broad sentiment that there's enough people coming in the summer. Maybe we can get them to stay longer or have a better experience, but we don't necessarily need more. And then Sisters Country is really sitting at a crossroads where strategic action now could really determine the course of your future in the medium and long term. And I think you can always say that, and that is true. But right now, there's kind of a collision of different events that are happening globally, but also in Sisters. So there's obviously a need for focusing on recovery from the pandemic, recovery from all the wildfires that have hit, the Sisters district specifically within the National Forest. Federal funding is flowing right now to support communities like yours who want to do this type of high-level work. And your community collaboration muscle is strong. You've been doing community visioning and collaborative work in these priority areas for many, many years. And so you have that muscle, and now it's a good opportunity to really focus it on this particular sector. So some of the areas of impact that I would suggest after learning about everything and being in Sisters and doing interviews and focus groups and looking at the visitor opportunity study is that there's kind of 4 big strategic impact areas that I think you can have. So one is fostering better communication and collaboration to ensure that Sisters Country becomes a sustainable tourism destination, for you to define what that means. Increase the diversity and improve the quality of experiences in Sisters Country to lengthen stays, particularly focusing on the shoulder and off season. And this needs to include sort of tourism related businesses receiving the type of support that they need to evolve. And then developing visitor management systems to protect the natural and cultural resources and to support improving the visitor experience. And then lastly, improving and focusing destination marketing in order to increase the demand for off-season visitation and lengthen visitor stays across the board. So like I said, that's kind of the end at the beginning, so you kind of know where the work is landed. I'm going to shift gears and get on time, shift gears, and cover some of the highlights in the destination scan. So this was, again, just kind of a baseline that we put together of bits and pieces of data after looking at a lot of reports and talking to quite a few people. And the idea being that this is just kind of the baseline, not necessarily for any specific purpose other than as you design a destination strategy, as you invite more people into the room, it's good to kind of have some key information in common that you can all sort of point to. So things within the scan includes kind of a destination overview. It includes those local perspectives that came out of the interview and focus group. It actually highlights quite a few things that are already going on in your community across the various plans and reports that exist that sort of align or uplift those strategic impact areas I just went over. And then there's some visitor data highlights from state economic impact and the regional visitor profile. And excuse me, separate from that is the visitor opportunity study, which you're going to have a presentation on next. This is just a sampling of quite a few of the plans and presentations that we reviewed in creating the destination scan. I think there was over 24 different things that we looked at. So one of the first things was actually working with the project leadership team to put our arms around what we mean by a destination when we talk about Sisters Country. So there weren't any lines on the map. So we sort of put our own line on the map. And this is meant to be a fuzzy line, not a hard border like it shows, but just kind of what do we think of when we say Sisters Country as a destination? What does it include? And where does it end? So where does it kind of end before another destination begins? So this was our best thinking around that, that can be used to kind of frame up next steps. When looking at the Travel Oregon regions, Sisters Country falls predominantly within the Central Oregon region, or almost, I think, entirely, actually, after studying the county lines a little bit more. And just for those of you who might not be as familiar with Travel Oregon's regions as I am, there are 7 regions that were created to promote travel across the state. And why it's significant is that 20% of the state TLC goes into those regional destination marketing and management organizations to support all kinds of activities across those destination management terms that I shared with you before. And we have Julia here with Central Oregon Visitors Association that represents the Central Oregon region. And how that lines out when you actually look at the county boundaries, because it's a little wonky, those state travel regions don't necessarily line up perfectly with the counties. But when you do look at that, Sisters Country is by and large within that Central Oregon region. I think there's just a little question mark of like whether or not Hoodoo ski area might, might creep on over into the Willamette Valley region, but I'm not so sure yet. And we pulled together sort of the history of Sisters, which I won't go into because I know so many of you are intimately familiar with this. This is from the Chamber's website, but just kind of as a level set, interesting forest timber-based community that really kind of stabilized after the highways went in, after Black Butte Ranch went in. And then I thought it was interesting in the 1970s when you guys adopted the style for your storefronts as part of your zoning ordinance. So that was, didn't realize it was so long ago. Way back in the 70s. Just kidding. Okay, so then we looked at the population, and as you know, it's been growing very quickly, especially over the last 10 years. And we just put this into context with how that looks with the surrounding areas. So if you look at Sisters as compared with Bend, you can see that you guys have experienced a tremendous amount of population growth over the last 10 years. The other thing, when you look at the income level, you can see that maybe the median income was not necessarily keeping pace with other surrounding communities such as Bend, but I know there's been some explanations given that that could be a result of the number of retirees in the Sisters area. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that when you do talk about Sisters Country, it's estimated, this was in the Sisters Country vision, it was estimated that 2/3 of the population actually lives outside of the city limits. So in 2016, the population of Sisters Country was calculated at 7,796. So just a kind of a side note that there's quite a few people that live outside of the city of Sisters that would want to be included in something like this. Sisters is becoming more diverse. Now, these are a lot of statistics that you probably, we don't necessarily have time to look at right now. This is from the most recent census data. This is just looking at race. Now you can look at race and ethnicity as well, but what you can see is that yes, the white alone population is increasing, but people who are considered to be of 2 or more races is increasing at a much faster rate, as are some of your other categories of Asian, etc. And we did look at that for ethnicity as well, but I'm not going to include that slide today, just to keep it slightly more brief. So the other thing we looked at is the top industries. This is out of your last economic profile, where you can see that back in 2019, prior to the pandemic, leisure and hospitality represented about 1/3 of your employment. And when you look at who your top employers are, you can see your number 1 employer for the city of Sisters is must be the Sisters area, Black Butte Ranch. And then down the line, and you can see Five Pines is on the list as well. And this chart kind of tracks what happened between 2020 and 2021. So you can see some of those effects probably of the pandemic on that. So looking at transportation, now nothing new here, but there's many transportation routes that sort of coalesce and move through Sisters. You guys are definitely sort of at the pinch point of the funnel. So that is ostensibly potentially a really good thing. When you look at services, you've got quite a number of places offering air service where people can easily get to Sisters. And you do have a couple of transit connections that are worth noting. I think Shuttle Oregon is fairly new and provides service through Sisters. You've also got some byways and bike routes as well, which I'll touch on in a minute. Now, the economic impact of tourism, we can look at that at a state level or a county level, but there isn't really information available at the Sisters or local level across the board, but we have been gathering some of that information through the Visitor Opportunity Study. You can see kind of the comparison of an average spend per day in Sisters versus Deschutes County overall, and this is for overnight trips. But there isn't necessarily a one-to-one for like the number of jobs being generated in Deschutes County to the number of jobs in Sisters. We just have that sort of rough 30% of the workforce there. So we kind of looked at the data available and also kind of looked at where the holes were for this. Moving on, we took a look at the transient lodging tax, which can also provide some insights in terms of visitor volume and visitor flow. So this is these are the current tax rates across communities in the region. You can see that Sisters is sitting at 8.99%, and in the last fiscal year it brought in just under $1 million. So you can sort of see that bump in the transient lodging tax between 1920 and 2021, actually, across the board in the region. So in effect, the pandemic has had some horrible effects, but in terms of transient lodging tax, it has actually been doing quite well in your area. So just a little bit of history, you can see some of the changes between the city and the state lodging tax over time, and where you all currently sit is that you have the 1.5% for state TLC, the 8.99 for city, and if you're outside of the city of Sisters, then you swap that for the 8% for the unincorporated Deschutes County. Just a little bit of a comparison to how things look in other communities as a percentage, and I'm not going to go into detail, but you can see that Sisters this is just looking at a baseline of 17-18 because it was when we could collect all of this data. But it's sitting, right in there with other communities that have similar types of activities going on. Bend is doing 29% of its TLT to tourism promotion. Cannon Beach is doing 10%, but they have a much, much larger volume of TLT. And you can see that history over time. When you look at the actual collections throughout the year, you can see that that seasonal oscillation of visitors. This is on a fiscal year, unfortunately, so it's a little strange to look at, but you can see that the highest summer months are here in July and August, and again in May and June. And you've got some really quiet months, as at least as shown to the TLT in November, February, and December. Sorry, November, December, and February. And that looks really similar to what's going on the Deschutes County level as well. We pulled together quite a bit of outdoor recreation data because outdoor recreation is one of your key year-round drivers. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but as you know, lots of assets in the National Scenic Area, lots of trails, and what's really neat is that there's a recent report that was produced by Eco Northwest on the economic and social analysis of trails in the Deschutes County region, so the Deschutes National Forest. So there's some really great info in here looking at sort of the amount of miles of trails, the type of trails, by community, and also looking at what's sort of managed and not managed. So lots of great data to build from should you want to. So I'm guessing that everyone on this call knows there's a Sisters Trail Alliance. That's a great asset for the city of Sisters to have a group that's pushing that. We did sort of a scan looking at what you could find online. This is just an example, the Sisters Recreation Trails. There were 61 that came up through alltrails.com. And then there are some big assets that are driving visitation that might be just a little bit below the surface that you might not sort of realize if you're in the community because things like events are more visible. But the city of Sisters is the only city actually on the Oregon Timber Trail, which runs the length of the state from south to north. So that's kind of a cool asset. You all are the starting point for the Sisters to Smith Rock Scenic Bikeway, which you may be aware of because that's been around for a lot longer. And then you're also on the Transamerica Trail. So you've got people passing through there on sort of this long haul journey from west to east. So a little bit of a spin around the destination scan, but it's bits and pieces to kind of put our arms around what we know currently and what are the sort of ingredients and things we might utilize in a destination strategy. I'd love to take it. You guys are okay doing questions a little bit later? Is there anything anyone's dying to know before I move on? Okay, all right. Okay, so moving on. So what we did as part of the work is we conducted 1-hour interviews with a few characters within the community, and names mentioned here. Some of you are here on the attending the session. And then we also conducted 90-minute focus groups, one that was just sort of your general business category, and these are businesses that interface with the visitor industry heavily. And then we also did a focus group around outdoor recreation. So we asked a set of 7 questions to all of those groups, and what I'm going to share with you are their comments and their themes that came out of the conversations, so that you kind of have their sentiments in mind. So the first question was just around what would a successful tourism and outdoor recreation economy look like? Let's take a sip. So people were wanting to have Sisters be known for a quality destination for winter sports as well as summer outdoor recreation, and that there are some kind of winter attractions or experiences that drive that off-season visitation. You're going to hear, a lot of similar themes, right? And then one of the things that came up that was, I thought, more progressive was that your destination that attracts and celebrates diverse visitors. So when people were talking about the community's role in the tourism economy, they said they wanted to enhance our way of life, and that the importance of locals is recognized in our strategy. People are interested in having a dialogue with one another about tourism to both celebrate the successes, but also grapple with the challenges. There seemed to be quite an appetite for that. Also, proponents of the visitor economy really wish that they had more tools to demonstrate the economic return of certain investments. And it felt like people that were sort of advocates for this industry didn't really have a lot to work with, and would like to have more. And they want to solve the affordable housing crisis. So I think we all do, but this came up in, I would say, every single conversation. With respect to outdoor recreation, the trail system was the #1 thing discussed. So people wanted an interconnected and diverse trail system, one that connects users to a diversity of experiences from user types to different levels, easy to difficult, to different landscape experiences from sort of wilderness, backcountry, and front country, And that key attractions within the community or around the community are connected by walking and bike routes and bike paths. Came up quite a bit. And lastly, with regards to outdoor recreation, that visitor management systems are in place. More widely, people acknowledged the Sisters Wilderness Permit system that was new, but they felt that more needed to be done in this space to really limit them and manage the use of resources during peak periods. Lastly, in terms of what a successful tourism and outdoor recreation economy, what it would look like, there's quite a few comments around improved visitor services. So wanting to offer a diversity of guided experiences through local guides and outfitters, as well as inbound tour operators. There's a sentiment that we Sisters Country could be attracting more of those inbound tour operators. Definitely higher quality food and higher quality services and restaurants came up over and over again. And there's a real interest in kind of aligning the food availability with the outdoor recreation patterns of behavior. So how could we offer maybe more takeaway options where people can come and grab sandwiches and picnics and things and take them out? We have expanded overnight offerings from more camping to middle range boutique hotels, and that there's a desire for more integration of the local arts, local talent into the visitor experience kind of across the board. So this is a quote, and I'm sorry, I know it's going to throw you off, but this is about Main Street running through Sisters, and I just love this quote, but just said, something needs to be done to capture more of the salmon on the salmon run, create eddies or pools for them to circulate around. It would benefit everyone to create more reasons to stop and hang out in Sisters. there's got to be a way to create more opportunities for people to stay. So it was a sentiment that like you've got this huge thoroughfare and you're at this constriction point with all these transportation routes, but sometimes the salmon are just swimming through your community. You know, anyway, maybe it's not that earth-shattering, but I thought it was really cute. So second question was, what do you believe needs to change in order to have that thriving, successful, and sustainable tourism economy? So there's a lot of comments around sort of the downtown and the business environment. We'll start with what I just talked about, which is kind of diverting the thoroughfare that runs through the middle of town. And we know that's been, you know, past initiative, but people are really interested in seeing that happen. And, you know, a comment from that was Main Street needs to be a regular street, not a freeway. There was quite a lot of discussion around the city and its codes for new business permitting and new business support. There was a real desire by the current entrepreneurs to have the city better support new businesses to open and also locate within the city limits. And, you know, I have a whole host of ideas of comments about, you know, finding grants or subsidies to assist with this. And, you know, I think there was definitely some positivity that came out in terms of how the city was handling support during the pandemic. And they said, gosh, if we could just kind of continue to have that type of support from the city, we'd love to see that. Some of the comments in that space also revolved around, if we could do that, we could attract more young families could stay, you know, et cetera. The next point is around people are interested in options for getting high quality food. So again, lots of comments around that. I don't need to go into detail. Limitations on restaurant capacity and service needs need to be addressed. So this idea that, you know, people will find that the restaurants are full and then they just move on. It seems like there's a lot obviously tied up in the pandemic and staffing shortages, which we know shall pass. And then affordable housing just needs to increase. So in order for, you know, this particular sector, really any sector to thrive, that's going to be something that has to be addressed, and people are pretty cognizant of that. Back to the outdoor recreation experiences, again, a key theme. Now, I didn't ask these themes. These are just themes that emerged from the open-ended responses. But some felt really good about your outdoor rec economy, and that some, you know, in some ways we're really close to our vision of success. But in other ways, we really have this opportunity to evaluate the infrastructure and the opportunities to find ways to ensure that we're able to welcome and accommodate diverse users. And then trails, lots and lots of comments about trails, but one comment that I thought was interesting was that people said, you know, the squeaky wheels get the grease, and we, you know, sort of trails proponents haven't been squeaky, but they felt like it's kind of time to sort of daylight the opportunities there. And then there was a really great comment about Ian, and actually there was a couple just saying that we have an awesome outdoor rec manager at the Forest Service, and that people were really confident with that leadership in place, and feeling like this is a good time to kind of get work done in the outdoor recreation management space. And then visitor management systems, people talked about that again. And then guides and outfitters, also once again, lots of discussion around, you know, how could we incentivize them? Could we issue an RFP? Could we expand on existing businesses, maybe create a youth entrepreneurship program? And then lastly, visitor education. So people really feel that the community needs to educate people as they come into town, or maybe before, about sort of your way of life, some of the rules of the road, and help sort of get ahead of some of the issues that are happening out on public land. Lastly, championing the value of tourism. Second on time. So people really do feel that we need to tell the story better about why tourism is important to the community. And again, they mentioned they needed tools to do that. And that they want to create a strategy for tourism management and commit resource and stick with it. And they did, this idea of consistency came up quite a number of times, that people really wanted more stability and more consistency in this space. And that, you know, it's great to get going on something, but even if staff changes, they want to see momentum kind of move forward over the medium and long term. Yeah, they want to see the city commit to a path and stick with it. And then involve stakeholders. And so there's quite a few comments around that, just in terms of people wanting to see stakeholders involved in both the creation of a strategy and also kind of the changes that everyone decides to take on. So what are the opportunities that you see immediately on the horizon? I'm not going to go into as much depth on everything because some of these themes then start to become repeated. So an outdoor recreation, that winter outdoor rec, maybe an indoor facility, developing more diverse trail opportunities. So people were kind of repeating the same thing, saying this is what we need to do, and it's kind of these are the immediate opportunities on the horizon. And something that came up that I thought was interesting, just kind of under other, is this idea of low-hanging fruit, that there's quite an opportunity to create more experiential opportunities within the city throughout the year. Maybe it's more free music, fly casting demonstrations, infusing more artistry or sort of open studios. But instead of just having these concentrated events, how could we kind of make Sisters more of a year-round experiential place? And again, this I won't cover in detail, but we did ask, what initiatives and programs or projects were already underway that a destination strategy could uplift. So there was a lot going on. You guys have a lot. And I would say by and large, the main thing here is that while there's a lot going on in the ecosystem, the dots aren't being connected. One group might have heard of something or know of something, but they're not really aware of what somebody might have brought up in another conversation or another group. But some great stuff here: Ben's new sustainability fund, the revisioning of outdoor recreation amenities in the burned areas in the Sisters district that's coming up. Quite a lot there in the bottom half related to the Forest Service. The review of the Sisters Wilderness Permit System. As you all know, the new Forest Service Ranger Station being planned, and quite a number of other things. So, coming to the end here, question 5, what might stand in the way? So, similar to challenges, but asked in a slightly different way just to see what people had on their minds. And I just want to jump to that section. So this is a theme, and I do want to kind of hit on it because I think it's a real challenge that stands in your way. People in the community opposing good ideas because they're afraid of change. Now, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh because I think this happens in every community, right? It sounds so generic. But there were a lot of really great examples that people brought up in this space. So the Black Butte bike path and the way that it was killed. Similarly, a couplet to facilitate one-way traffic was killed by downtown businesses. And there was another sentiment, direct quote, that there's these big meetings and nothing ever comes of them, these big visionary projects. So, there's a sentiment of like, we need to do something, we want to do something, but we're afraid that anything sort of bold and important is going to get killed. And so I think that's an important sentiment to be aware of and to think about in the design of a process. Our inability to develop more experiences with our assets to meet the increased demand of our area. So you've got this high demand, but you're not necessarily developing the volume of experiences to sort of make the most of that or manage it. Lack of focus and not having a good strategy in place yet. Changeover with city staff leadership. So there's concern about that, that the city has changed a lot and they want to see something kind of consistent again. And then despite the increased funding coming from TLT, not feeling like there's strong enough leadership, there's kind of void in the leadership to address the key challenges raised as a concern. Yeah. And then let's see, rapid growth in the community. Many are fed up, wary of more marketing. Affordable housing is an issue again. And then there were some comments around public land managers just deciding to limit access rather than to kind of address that negative visitor behavior up front. So moving on to the good news, community's strongest asset. So you've got a lot of stuff. I don't need to read through it. I think you all know what your assets are, but one of the top things was just that we have this tourist economy. It's genuine. People are coming. They're interested in Sisters. You're even more off the beaten path than Bend, so you're kind of this trending community. And there's a ton of stuff to do in the outdoors. And you've got obviously all these amazing festivals that link to your culture and heritage. And then one thing that came up that I thought was really cool. I mean, not cool. It's all cool, but the food innovation thing was something I hadn't really clued into. But when somebody, or maybe it was multiple people, went down the list, I was like really surprised how much you guys had within your own community. The distiller, the Wild Roots distiller, Josie's Best Waffle Mix, Kitchen Table, Sisters Olive and Nut, Cascade Street Distillers, which I think is the same, Wade from Three Creeks. So there's a food kind of theme that maybe hasn't been pulled out or pulled together. And then the other thing is that you have real funding here. You do have a TLT, You've got the National Asset Management Program. You've got the Great American Outdoors Act. You have the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife Outdoor Recreation and Conservation Fund. You have COVA at the table, City of Sisters. So people really see that there's quite a bit of funding that could be coalesced for some greater impact. You have the Roundhouse Foundation, and then obviously you have a commitment from the community. You have people who are really committed to a strong, sustainable community, and they're willing to roll up the sleeves and do the hard work. Last question, your community values, which I feel like you all know and love, and I don't really need to share this with you, but this is what came up in the interviews and focus groups. So, number one would be that small town vibe. And, one of the sentiments was we like to leave our doors unlocked. We want it to stay that way. We want to feel safe wherever we go in the community, and we want to keep that quaintness. That we're vibrant. We have this vibrant Main Street. We want to keep this vibrant downtown. And then another big theme was that connectedness and community feeling. We have this connectedness with one another. Everyone is trusting, and it feels like a community. And you do still have families that go way back in history, but even newcomers kind of, do get adopted into that community feeling. And it's a casual community that came up. It's not as small as Paisley, but it's not Portland. It's kind of this in between. Obviously, can-do spirit, as evidenced by all of your vision and all of your work, and also you guys have the ability to have your voices heard. Like, it's pretty incredible. You have the Nugget, Citizens for Community. You have numerous convenings through the city, etc. And then lastly, not lastly, I guess, but the cherishing those places that are not overrun, and there's a real concern that they remain enjoyable. We've talked about that. And let's see, being open to change, open to growth. That's a sentiment that came out about your values. And then obviously, your love and appreciation for the arts, music, outdoor rec, and Western heritage was all there. So just quick summary on sort of the interviews and focus groups component. You guys have a community with a lot of heart, soul, and character. Everyone I spoke with was really passionate about where you live. And, there's this deep and genuine love, but there's also, really this deep concern about where the city is headed, the big issues around growth, affordable housing, and this concept of the community sentiment getting in its own way. And then people are really ready to roll up their sleeves to work on setting the future direction of tourism and outdoor rec. Like, they're there and they want to do the work. So I'm going to come back to this piece, and I'm going to stop and take the screen off of share and just check in with everybody and see how you're doing, and see if there's any questions that myself or anyone on the team can help answer.
And Kristen, let's maybe pass it to Mayor Preeden so he can engage with council and see if there's first any questions from them.
Thank you, Corey. First of all, Kristen, great presentation. I think the first thing that I see is obviously there's some complex issues going on. There are a lot of things that have many positives and I wouldn't say many negatives, but there are some obvious issues with growth and how it's all maintained. But what I see overall is I mostly see the positivity in this, and I fully admit I'm a positive type person, but I really see just a huge opportunity with the future of Sisters and tourism by getting this destination management information together and coalescing into an idea and putting a plan together and getting mostly everybody on board and moving forward with it. So thank you so much for your hard work, Kristen. I appreciate that. I really don't have any questions. That was a lot of information to take off the first pass, the first 30, 40 minutes. So thank you. But I'd really like to go to Council President Conley. I know she was involved in it, and see if she has any comments to parallel some of what you're saying, and see if she has any questions for you as well.
I just want to reiterate, last Wednesday during council workshop, I warned you all it would be fast and furious and overwhelming. And I encourage you all to take time after the meeting to digest and come up with your questions. I don't have anything to add to what has been shared, other than to reiterate what Kristen said, is that we're not looking for a volume of tourists. We're looking for the tourists to spend volumes of dollars to have a better experience in the shoulder season in winter. And I would like to claim that sentiment, but some people from McMinnville were visiting on Friday and I stole their thoughts. So that's my aim from all of this. That's it.
Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think we can all kind of agree with that we're not targeting swarms of just random tourists to come in all the time. We're want a better experience for all, including the people who live here, but also the tourists as well. So I agree with that. Councilor Blum, do you have anything?
No, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Councilor Letts?
Yeah, so far so good. Have lots of questions, but some of them might get answered here in the next few minutes. So I'll just gonna stick to some brass tacks ones. When you use the term sustainable tourism, do you mean that in the 3 E's strategy, or do you mean sustainable as in something that can last long term, or both?
Good question. Thank you, Councilor Letts. I actually removed those slides out of my destination strategy section to keep it shorter, but absolutely around the 3 E's. So looking at the full spectrum of how tourism impacts, the local economy, your natural environment, and really your cultural environment as well. And then, economy, community, your community. So yeah, the whole strategy is kind of designed within those 3 E's. And I'd be happy to even put those slides into the final presentation, so you have that, at least kind of our working definition. Yeah.
Okay, great. And then my second clarification was, you mentioned something, people wanting more visitor education, and I know you touched on it a little bit, but I was curious, maybe if you could just explain that a little more, because in my mind, when you said that, I was thinking, oh, maybe we need better signage around town so people can move around better. But you were kind of saying, well, if people actually some more education before they even got here. So you can clarify that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So it's becoming quite, I would say, a trend is developing sort of responsible visitor communication campaigns. And I've seen them and been involved with them at both the community level, but also at the statewide level. So they can consist of, it's a multi-tiered sort of communication strategy of how do you communicate what the community wants to say to the visitor, both in advance and then while they're on site. So I did a project in Maine where they really, it takes quite a bit of work to wrestle down what it is you want to say. What are the core messages, whether it's like the values that you want them to understand, or whether it's actual, specific rules of the road for your key activities. Here's how to, here's how we treat our bike lanes. Here's what not to do. Here's what to do. It can run the gamut. And then, there is a statewide responsible recreation campaign called Take Care Out There that's happening within the state of Oregon. So if you're looking, to do something specific to outdoor rec, there's something you can sort of draw from and implement at the local community level, or you can do your own, community style communications initiative. Just depends the direction you want to go. And then there's a national campaign as well around responsible outdoor recreation. I'm sorry, I'm like, what's that called again? I can't remember right now. Let me think about it and get back to you, Councilor Letts.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Councilor Letts. Councilor Ross?
I'm probably at
Final
the fast and furious digestion stage. It's a good presentation. I have questions in the back of my mind, some of which are probably not appropriate for this period of time. I think as we look to the future and we think about the resistance that has come into certain projects, the time may be coming up to revisit some of those. I lived in Sun River when there was great opposition to the trail to go to Benham Falls. That went on for quite a while. finally was overcome. And I think even those folks that were really against it have discovered that A, it's improved their quality of life, and B, it hasn't created the great influx of people crawling around in their backyards and taking their barbecues, whatever they were worried about. So I think just because something doesn't work once in terms of public opinion, maybe we need to sometimes be ready to go back and run up against that wall another time and see if we still get clobbered to the ground.
All right, Gary, thank you much. So we've been around the room and that's where we're at. So Kristen and Corey, I guess we could move on with the presentation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also, Councilor Letts, I do have a response. The national campaign is #recreate responsibly. Right, Ian? So I'm seeing Ian's head shake. Okay, yes, got that. There's also a whole website dedicated to sort of coordinating across the federal agencies around that campaign. All right, so I'm going to pass the baton over to Egan, who's going to share some highlights from the visitor opportunity study that was conducted this summer.
Sounds great. I've been looking forward to this. So, hi everyone, I'm Egan. I'm with Echo Northwest. I'm based in Bend. Been lucky to work with Kristen and the project management team for the last few months to conduct this survey and finally now share some results. So we'll get into it. I'll just say, for me personally, I'm pretty new to the Bend area, and one of the points is to see how you encourage more repeat visits to Sisters, and you've certainly made a repeat visitor out of me. In the course of this, I've been up to Metolius River and Camp Sherman quite often now. So just to reiterate some of the main goals of this survey, we really wanted to figure out just give you a picture of who's visiting Sisters, where they're going and how they're planning those trips and what their experience is. And then specifically related to that experience, what would encourage them to stay longer, or what are kind of barriers they're facing to being repeat visitors. And I think by and large, this should hopefully provide some data to support, some quantitative data to support the initiatives y'all are working on with Kristen and as a team in general. So just a quick overview and background of the survey. So it was an online survey that was hosted on SurveyMonkey. People could take. It was relatively short, about 15 minutes, and we did a combination of targeting people who were visiting Sisters this particular summer, and then also distributing it to previous visitors who had been to the Sisters area in the last couple of years. So the survey was open August 12th to September 8th. We did on-site intercepts from Friday, August 13th to Monday, August 16th. As I'm sure you could guess without even looking back, that was a really smoky weekend. And so we had a few, probably a less robust group of on-site visitors that weekend than we might have hoped. But by and large, we got great responses. There was a lot of really good work collaboratively with the team. Carrie with the city played a huge role in helping coordinate all this and making sure we reached a target level of responses that we got to. So the on-site intercepts included we had an intern who was on site, gave visitors a survey card that would direct them to the online survey. And so he intercepted people at restaurants and shops downtown, some of the outdoor rec sites, and then also Blackbeat Ranch and Camp Sherman. And then those same cards were left throughout town through the duration of the survey. And then we had some online distribution to Creekside Campground, previous visitors, Sisters Folk Fest, the Quilt Festival, Stampede, and several other groups. So putting that together, we had almost 1,500 responses, which is a great rate of responses for a relatively small community in a small area in Sisters. 259 of those were collected from people who picked up the card or were given the card by our intern on site. Which is a pretty solid sample of that we can draw conclusions about visitors who came this summer, and a little bit of more information about sort of your mean or your average visitor in the summer season to Sisters. And then we had online responses from an additional about 1,200 visitors. In total, we got, once we filtered out incomplete surveys, we had 1,263 responses. And just to kind of foreshadow as I go through, especially when giving a profile of your average visitors in the beginning, I'm going to really target this on-site sample. And then I'll provide results from the full sample later on. And when we share the final results with Kristen to share with you later, you'll have results from both samples. All right, sorry for the little confusion there. But here's kind of an interesting way to see what, where are people visiting from? And this wouldn't, this is who took our survey. It's not necessarily where is the distribution of all visitors who are coming into Sisters, but it does give you a good look at the reach, I think, particularly for these bigger profile events like Sisters Folk Fest, the Quilt Show. You're attracting visitors from really almost all 50 states, primarily Oregon, Washington, and California. But I looked this up. I just thought it was fun. It was Pembina County, North Dakota. You even got a visitor from. So I don't know how that happened, but I thought that was kind of cool. So broad reach, and really like targeting more specific or looking more specifically at the numbers. 700 responses from Oregon. Washington was the next most popular state, then California, and then kind of diminishing responses as we moved east. Your top 5 counties for visitors from Oregon were Multnomah, Clackamas, Deschutes, Washington, and Lane County. So I'm going to go start by giving a rundown of the kind of the big picture results, and then I'll go into and kind of the big themes, kind of trying to tie back to what Kristen had been mentioning, and then I'll go into some more specific detail about each of some of the questions. So key findings, I mean, really the high level thing is, visitors to Sisters were really satisfied with their experience, and it'd be nice to just stop there and say that's great, but obviously that was not the point. And there really is, out of this survey, I think we're able to identify some key areas for improving the visitor experience and encouraging repeat visits, and figuring out some strategies to get some more shoulder season visits. So just for your overall visitor profile, visitors tended to be older, traveling without children on 3 to 4 night destination vacations. They were predominantly white, staying with friends and family or vacation rentals. And this kind of foreshadows a really key finding that not as many visitors as you may like ended up staying in motels and resorts, just simply due to the lack of availability of those options. The most popular activities that people participated in were eating at restaurants, hiking, shopping, breweries, and visiting parks and natural areas, I think showcasing just the kind of diversity Sisters offers as both kind of an urban and outdoor destination. Not urban, but kind of these restaurants and shopping activities mixed with the outdoor rec. The most important factors for visiting, what is really kind of motivating people to come, people rated scenic beauty, the opportunity to just relax and have good local dining options were rated as the 3 most important factors people had when choosing whether or not to visit. Overall, what visitors liked, they actually had a lot of positive things to say about the restaurants and food. Of course, like the scenic beauty, a lot of positive reviews about the events, and just enjoying Sisters as a spot to enjoy spending time with family. Those kind of the big themes of positive feedback. What they disliked, and this will be a theme throughout, traffic was a big concern, then the lack of availability of restaurants and accommodations, and especially the affordability overall of the trip, but particularly of accommodations, were the main complaints and related to their decision or their feedback on whether or not they would choose to visit again. And again, yeah, distance, cost, crowding, and just having other preferred destinations were reasons people gave for not choosing to visit in the future. Okay, so I'll get into just an overview of the visitors first. So the average group size was about 3.2 people per group. That's 2.5 adults, about a half a child, just to show that really a lot of visitors were not traveling with children. And again, was kind of weighted more towards older respondents. Visitors could be traveling either to Sisters for the day or coming on an overnight trip. So like, for instance, me, I'm in Bend. If I just, drove up to Sisters for the afternoon, did some fishing, got a cup of coffee, that'd be a day trip. Whereas somebody staying at Five Pines, that's an overnight trip. So of our sample, 71% were on overnight trips. The average length was 3.8 nights. Those on day trips were 29% of the sample, and the average length of a day trip to the area was about 4.5 hours spent in that sister's country. And kind of going back to, Kristen showed you that map that we defined as sister's country. So this is the time and visits to that overall area, not necessarily just sisters. So how did they get there? Most people traveled by car. About 7% traveled by camper or RV, definitely a popular destination for camping. And then a few traveling by commercial airline and rental car, being primarily your out-of-state visitors. And then some folks even traveling by bike or by foot, likely from the Pacific Crest Trail. So then, we asked this question: was sisters sisters really the main reason that they left home, that they took this trip away from home? And for 56% of people, sisters was the primary destination on their trip that we asked them about. 16% of people were just stopping through sisters on the way to somewhere else. So maybe they were coming down to Bend and they just swung in and got a bite to eat. And then 28% were on a multi-destination trip. So this might be somebody coming down to stay, to visit Bend. And on one day of their trip to Bend, they drove up and visited the sisters area. So, but by and large, this really shows a lot of people were coming to sisters as their main destination. Where they stayed overnight, about 60% stayed overnight in sisters, 20% stayed overnight in Black Butte. And then a good chunk were staying in campgrounds or other locations throughout the region. And they could have stayed in multiple on their trip, obviously. The parks and outdoor recreation sites that visitors went to, obviously the majority of people, just kind of by virtue of if you're driving into sisters, most people would have visited the scenic byway, but that didn't necessarily register with everyone. But besides that, Subtle and Scout Lake, the Three Sisters Wilderness, Smith Rock, Black Butte Trailhead, Metolius River, kind of your main outdoor recreation destinations. Peterson Ridge had some visits, and White's Creek a little bit less. So this is one that we definitely want to highlight: the proportion of visitors by the type of accommodation. So you'll notice that really most visitors that stayed overnight, they stayed overnight with family or friends. So that's almost 30% of visitors. 25% stayed at a private rental. That might be like an Airbnb or a rental at Black Butte. Almost 20% stayed in a campground, and then only 17% stayed in a hotel or motel. 10% stayed at a resort. And so really this kind of highlights the fact that the lack of accommodations was a barrier to having people stay and spend money on hotels and lodging in the sisters area. And they were more likely to stay with unpaid lodging with family and friends, or cheaper lodging at such as a campground or RV park. The average number of nights stayed across those types of accommodations, again, on average, there's about 3.8 nights. Our hotel and motel visitors were a little bit shorter. Throughout, I'll break down a few results by comparing low-income visitors to the overall sample, just to highlight particularly here a few of the kind of affordability concerns and also the different activities that different types of visitors are doing. So low-income visitors were, we defined as having less than $50,000 in household income. They were significantly more likely to stay in a campground than the overall sample, and also took shorter visits to the area. So when I know Kristen and you all were talking about increasing the diversity of visitors, that's one potential area where affordability and access to affordable accommodations is a concern. All right, so visitor activities and satisfaction. What did people do and how did they like it? So we categorized the primary reasons for that people listed for their visit to the sisters area, and 45% were based around some kind of outdoor recreation. So that was either hiking, kayaking, biking, etc. 23% visited. They said that local dining, food, bars were their primary reason for visiting the area. 21% said visiting family, friends, and relatives was their main reason. 8% said attending a festival, events, or wedding was their primary reason, and 3% gave other explanations. So then breaking those down a little bit more granularly, the top 10 activities that people participated in were eating at local restaurants, hiking, shopping, visiting a brewery or distillery, visiting a park, swimming, visiting friends and relatives, photography, leisure biking, and camping. Now, of those, as I kind of previewed in the text slide there, we asked people what was of those activities, what was their primary motivator? And they said eating at a local restaurant or cuisine was actually the primary motivator for for 18% of visitors. And then visiting friends and relatives, hiking, biking, and camping were also important drivers. These are the things that really drive people to come and visit Sisters. Now, thinking less about activities, but just more about attributes of the visit, we asked how important were each of these different factors of the visit in their decision whether or not to visit Sisters Country, to go and to take that trip there. And scenic beauty, a place to relax, and eating at local restaurants were the main or the top 3 reasons people gave, top 3 most important things people considered when choosing to visit Sisters. The lowest 3 ratings were for learning about the cultural history of the area, visiting family, friends, and colleagues, or visiting a farm or ranch. People did not find those as important when deciding whether or not to visit. Then we asked them how satisfied they were with those qualities. And what you'll see, what you'll see, I'll jump to the next slide, is really that for each characteristic, the satisfaction rating exceeded the importance rating. And that is really shows the strength that Sisters is kind of exceeding expectations for a lot of these important attributes that are driving people to visit. But there are a few important takeaways we can take here if we plot the average importance rating for each attribute of a visit against the average satisfaction rating for the attribute of the visit. And we would hope that they're at least along this line where importance matches up with satisfaction, and they're all above the line, which is telling us again that they exceeded the importance rating. The highest amount of exceedance of the importance rating was for visiting a farm or ranch, learning about cultural history, and visiting family, friends, and colleagues. So potentially those are things that were not important to visitors, but they found themselves really enjoying while they were there. At the top here, just having scenic beauty and a place to relax were really important to people, and people really enjoyed those things about their visit. The only 2 things we might be able to say here is that eating at local restaurants and the affordability and ease of access were rated a little bit lower. So these of all the attributes here, there were kind of the most potential concerns around restaurants and affordability. And that does match with other themes that we saw throughout this. Now comparing those across races and income, low-income visitors were much more likely to go camping, as I mentioned before. Non-white visitors were a little bit less likely to participate in outdoor recreation activities, but satisfaction was pretty similar across all races and incomes. Now we'll move on to trip planning. And so what did people use to plan their trips, and how are they thinking about coming back to Sisters in the future? So word of mouth advertising was really effective, and it was really the main way people got information about their visits. So previous personal experience and information from friends and relatives were 2 of the top responses for resources used. And then obviously just general internet sources were key. Social media was actually rated relatively low. The Sister of Chamber of Commerce website was rated a little bit higher than Facebook there as well. Length of future visits. So when we're thinking about how to extend those existing stays, what we find is that the majority of people said that if they were going to visit again, they would stay between 3 and 5 nights, which, as I brought up at the beginning, is about the length of stay that visitors are currently taking on their vacations to Sisters. Only 13% said that they would consider visiting Sisters for a destination vacation of 6 or more nights, and that's probably the chunk that we want to target and see how to expand that. 18% said they'd visit for a day trip, and 27% said they would visit for just a 1 to 2 night getaway. Just over 50% of respondents said they had visited multiple times in the past year. And almost 90% said they were either somewhat likely or extremely likely to visit in the next 2 years. So this is really encouraging that people did have a good experience and they want to come back. But when we target just these 7% that said they were unlikely to visit, we asked them why. And they said that it was too far to go. They just preferred to go somewhere else. It was too expensive, too crowded, and then listed a few other responses, including, again, distance. They said that they were too old. Some mistyped. They said they would love to visit again. COVID, traffic, fires, and lack of accommodations were all some write-in responses that we got as feedback from respondents. So what people would like to do on future visits, a lot of the same: hiking, eating at restaurants, visiting a brewery, distillery, shopping, or camping. What we do see here is a lot of desire to do water-based recreation. So kayaking, swimming, paddleboarding, all these show up as a top 10 activity for the future, and they were not rated as high on current visits. Now, that was what I just showed you, was the on-site sample that didn't include a bunch of these festival goers. And what we see shooting to the top is, if we ask that same question to the full sample, we see that the number 2 response was attending a festival or event. And this shows that really these festivals, like the Quilt Show, like Sisters Folk Fest, are really great avenues for encouraging repeat visitation. And I think a lot of people expressed that they were very satisfied with the events, and they were a big motivator for them to come back. And these events are likely a little bit less on the radar of folks that may not already have known about them. So low-income visitors were a little bit less likely to participate in outdoor recreation, and again, kind of highlighting the affordability concerns here. Low-income visitors were 2.4 times more likely to rate Sisters as too expensive than the average visitor. Again, as in many of these comparisons, this is not a huge sample size, but I think it's indicative of a trend that Kristen brought up, and likely is a lot of y'all are aware of for affordability. Then comparing non-white respondents, they were a little bit less likely to be extremely likely to visit the Sisters area again in the next 2 years, but they were still very likely to do so compared to the full sample. Then Kristen brought up a little bit on the economic impact. So we look at the average party spent, or the average group spent about $1,200 per visit on overnight visits. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of folks that ended up staying with family and friends, or they stayed in campgrounds. And so if we do the same economic impact or the same visitor spending estimates for just your hotel and vacation rental guests, we see that spending increases by about $430 total on the trips. And so again, if that's something of interest, your guests that are staying in these vacation rentals, hotels, Airbnbs and such are generating more of an economic impact. For time, I'll kind of skip past those numbers here. Lastly, to wrap up, I'll go through some of the written feedback. We asked people basically what they liked about their trip, what they didn't like, and what changes could be made to help them visit more frequently. And what visitors said that they liked were restaurants, bars, and dining. They liked the events and festivals. They liked the natural beauty. They liked the relaxation and family time. They also like the lodging, shopping, and the access to outdoor recreation. But what they disliked, probably no surprise, this is reiterating what's been said before, traffic and parking, the lack of availability or expensive accommodations, the lack of availability of restaurants. And then there were some situational complaints from this year: COVID, wildfire smoke, and staffing came up, and the overall cost or expense. Just to show you a graph, when we categorized the written responses for their positive feedback, 35% were based around events, 18% on food and restaurants, 18% on natural beauty, family and friends, just kind of as a place to spend that time. Shopping was 10%, and only 7% mentioned outdoor recreation specifically. A few brought up this small town or community atmosphere as a big asset that they really liked and wanted to preserve about the community. Just over 20% of visitors said that they didn't experience any difficulties, and they, everything was great. But just really kind of screaming at you. And as any of us who've driven through Sisters on a busy weekend know, it's traffic was the main complaint. Restaurant availability or choices were the next most common complaint. Then just the lack of accommodations or the expensive accommodations, parking, smoke, cost, not enough trails, and staffing were concerns there. Finishing up, I'll just kind of highlight a few quotes that people shared that I think reflect these broader findings, what people liked. Let's see, there were a lot of really positive comments about the Sisters Creekside Campground and a desire to have more spaces like that so that people can stay in town at a lower cost and have that great access to the town. So that was a really great asset that a lot of people mentioned. Nice campground close to Peterson Ridge trails and easy shopping. And then a lot of really positive comments about each of the festivals and some kind of heartwarming ones about people's chance to go see the Quilt Fest or Quilt Show. I want to focus in on some of the difficulties faced. Again, just jumping off the page at you is traffic and people's concerns about the safety of getting through town. We started going through residential streets to keep from having to turn left at the intersections in town. And then comments like this, I think, are really highlight the concern around lodging availability and the consequences of a lack of availability. And then, so this says lodging is sparse and super expensive. That's the main reason I stay in Bend and drive or ride my bike to Sisters. I've never actually been able to stay in Sisters during the Quilt Show week because the hotels fill up so quick. Would have liked to stay in Sisters. Instead, I stayed in Bend and drove over for the day. So people expressing like a desire to stay in Sisters, to spend that time there, but just simply not being able to. And then lastly, specifically improvements visitors wanted, more dining options and places to stay. I think in a nutshell, that really sums a lot of the concerns expressed, the inability to get accommodations, the expense during festival weekends, different food options and the cost of food options, biking trail variety, biking specific trails, and biking shuttle. Some people express an interest in connecting some of the bike routes throughout town. And again, just comments around having more lodging. So that is it. I'll leave this up and kind of put it out for any questions or just general discussion you all want to have.
All right, thank you very much. I'll just say a couple of comments based on some of what I just heard. First of all, one of the early things that I saw in your presentation was about Mackenzie Pass Scenic Byway being a very popular thing. The one thing I'd like to mention to everybody, and especially our consultants, is that's really only open 3 or 4 months of the year. So that's actually it's closed down in the winter because the state doesn't plow it. So that number is actually lower than it really is, because if it's only open, about a third of the year, that's a very surprising number. So it's great. It usually opens up in June, July, when they can finally get the gates open, and then after the first few snowfalls, they don't plow it anymore and it gets closed again. So that was a surprising number there. Another surprising number I saw that's going to make a few of you chuckle is that 29% of the people came here for swimming. We don't have a public pool here in Sisters, so that's an interesting number there, I found out. Other than that, I don't have any questions or any further comments, and I'd like to speak to my other counselors. We have about 6 minutes scheduled left, and we can go a little bit past because we don't have any meetings after this. So Counselor Conley, is there anything you'd like to add to this or highlight?
No, but I'm sure they are referencing swimming in the lakes, and I'll take more time to digest the information down the line.
Yeah, you're.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Yeah, there's a little inside info there, not a big deal. Counselor Ross, do you have anything?
Not too much. I kind of was going to echo what Nancy said. I think as a kayaker, you head up to Subtle Lake or one of the other lakes up in the area, and I think that we don't probably emphasize enough that we are a place to stay to do those kinds of activities beyond the campgrounds at Subtle, which are filled up usually by the 1st of May.
Yeah. Good point. Counselor Letts?
Another clarification, just to make sure, the lack of accommodations, was that, I know everything's been a little backwards the last couple of years with COVID, and people being a little more preferring to stay away from other people, so you can understand the interest in like short-term rentals and staying with friends and family. I was just wondering if that was backed up by data from the hotels and the traditional accommodations in town, that they were actually, kind of fully booked, so that when they were saying that that was an issue, that was the issue, was that hotels were booked, and so they were kind of forced to look for other options. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that does. I think it's a good point. We certainly didn't. We haven't discussed that with hotels. I think, yeah, there's likely multiple ways to interpret that that aren't all necessarily that that there is an actual lack of accommodations, but that's, people express that, and it was I'd have to go back, but somewhat balanced between just the lack of accommodations and just the expense of accommodations. And I think potentially I conflated those two a little bit.
Okay, that's it for now. Thanks.
Yeah, okay.
And that's a great question, Jennifer. It's something that I thought of as well, and it's something we'll definitely want to follow up as a city and kind of go back to our lodging providers and say, hey, how full were we during this summer? And possibly, we can find out during the time of the survey, maybe even, and figure out how it corresponds. But good point. So who have I got left? Counselor Blum.
Also, Judy could probably tell us what the occupancy rate was during that period of time. And from the look at the tax revenue coming in, it seems like we were pretty full up. But you do get a totally different response from people who talk about traffic and accommodation and all that kind of stuff if they're only coming during a major event. If they're coming on a weekend when there's not a major event, the experience could be different. So that was one of the things I was kind of wondering, are we getting a big concern about the traffic and parking and all that kind of thing on major event weekends or all the time? Because I don't see us as having a parking problem unless it's a major event weekend. So that would be kind of interesting to know the difference on. And also I was wondering during these questions, was Five Pines considered just a local accommodation, or was it considered a resort?
Yeah, good questions on both of them. Just your last one, people would have been kind of at liberty to decide if they felt like Five Pines was a hotel or if it was a resort. We just asked them to kind of self-report that. And then, yeah, I think on the other points, it is worth bringing up, like for the online distribution, we sent it to, I think we asked anyone who had visited in the past 2 to 3 years to fill out the survey. So that could have included, I think, and Carrie might know the specifics on which like Folk Fest visitors were contacted, but that would include pre-COVID visits. as well as COVID visits on just kind of the lodging point. I think when we're looking at that full sample versus just the on-site sample, maybe we can go back and take a look more targeted at how those two groups really felt about maybe some of the specific issues like parking.
Right, because I can see a person's frustration if they try and come on a folk festival weekend or a quilt show weekend and they can't find a place to stay. Well, you know, that's an obvious situation. Whereas on, you know, a weekend in May, it would be a completely different situation. And so if we can ferret that out, that would be very helpful, because I think some of the complaints apply only to a certain designated period of time.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, great points, Andrea. And I thought the same thing about traffic. There's a couple of things with traffic. Obviously, for people in town or knowing, we've been working on this roundabout since 2018, and you know, we're hoping to get that in the next, you know, 3 years or so, 4 years at the very latest. And so that's going to provide us an alternate route for our trucking industry and other people that just don't want to stop at Sisters, which will really alleviate some of the downtown issues. But as far as like turning left in the middle of summer, I can honestly say, welcome to the club. And, you know, going through residential areas to kind of circle back so you don't have to turn left at, you know, from one of our side streets onto the highway. We all do that. And so I think that one of the things that we can do, and one of the most important points that I saw in the first batch that Kristen did is tourist education, but also paired with local, local citizen education, how we can help tourists learn how to get around town and help, you know, we can teach tourists, here's how we do it, and you're going to get along a lot better in town during your visit by mimicking things that we do. You know, slow down a little bit. Make sure you stop at the stop signs. We're a very walkable city, so we have crosswalks everywhere. And that's because that's how we want the city to be, so slow down. And then we also need to teach ourselves to do a lot of the same things as well. So I think that one of the things that I really liked from the early part was that tourist education piece. And I think that we can certainly all do that better amongst ourselves and with our tourists in the future. Corey, is there anything else you want to, or Kristen, you want to wrap things up a little bit?
Kristen has some more to share, and then
Great.
I have a little bit as well.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Egan, and thanks for the questions to help put a finer point on some of that data. I just have a few slides to wrap, so I apologize that we're going over by a few minutes. Thanks for sticking on for those who can. So let me just get, sorry. Oops. All right, so just to close, I'll make this brief, but part of the work that we did during phase 1 was to outline a process for phase 2, so what could happen next, as well as how would we set up a destination management team, or excuse me, destination leadership team. So the process really was designed to kind of achieve those outcomes that we covered in the beginning. This is kind of a refined set that I'm not sure if we want to take the time, but really to create, I will go over them, to a diverse and inclusive destination leadership team to guide the process and sort of ready to support future activities, a clear vision of success for the future of your outdoor rec and tourism economy, a clear understanding of local values that need to be retained, and it sounds like communicated over time, community stakeholders who are educated about current trends and best practices and feel engaged in a way that inspires them to take action on their own, independently or collectively, and then a clear roadmap to implement priority projects that move the community kind of forward in time. So the 3-part process for potential phase 2 would just be spending a fair bit of time in the early phase, really forming that destination leadership team and sort of building the foundation, then developing that sort of process of community engagement to sort of inform, educate, and then coordinate across activities. And these are just rough, estimated timings depending on, what the community chooses to do, really. And then the third piece is driving that implementation home kind of through the destination leadership team and, partners that want to come to the table and work collaboratively. So this would be kind of oriented around these draft strategic areas of focus. So they would be refined by that destination leadership team at the outset. And a destination leadership team is kind of what it sounds like. It's a group of stakeholders from these diverse sectors that work together over time to really manage the destination. And we did spend some time looking at, who would likely serve on that. And this list kind of comes from some experimentation with our initial project management team, but also just kind of identifying who those key groups would be that really should be at the table. And this has quite a few options within it. So this isn't having, 18 people on your steering committee, but sort of these groups of people representing different facets of the community. And with that, I think I'm just going to pause there and thank the project management team for all of their time over the last many months in contributing to this. And Corey and Carrie are going to be the stewards of all of the outputs from the phase 1 process. So please feel free to follow up with them. And I'll pass the baton over to Corey to close.
Thanks, Kristen. Yeah, appreciate all the work you and Dan and Egan did on this effort. I don't need a lot of time other than to say that there's a lot of work, potential work to be done. It's exciting. We're in a great place. We can be in an even better place. And so in terms of next steps, that's something that the city council, the city, and then our key partners, we're going to have to coordinate on over the next few months and figure out how much time, how much resources do we want to invest in this effort, because it's not something that is going to be easy necessarily. And once we do embark more diligently on destination management, as Kristen defined it, it's something that we know that we want to sustain. We don't want it to be a flash in the pan. There's certainly been some criticism of past ideas and potential efforts that weren't sustained, and momentum wasn't sustained over time. So that's all I have, Mayor Prieden, is to say that we'll be continuing to discuss this effort and understand better where we want to go, how far and how fast, and like Kristen said, working towards better connecting those dots.
All right, thank you much. And again, thanks to Kristen and Egan for great presentations, great work. We really appreciate it. I'd like to encourage my fellow city councilors, think about this issue. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of info, and I assume from Carrie we'll get copies of this presentation, so we have all the information before us. And I would say that certainly I'll be talking to Corey about it this week and next, and just try and figure out how I feel about all of it. I'm very encouraged, and I think that this is a way we want to go. But again, everybody needs to think about it on their own and figure out what they think. That's why there's 5 of us, and that's not one. I'll leave that for each of you. And thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Carrie, for getting this meeting together. And until we speak again, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.